After the United States becomes independent, the British no longer are going to protect American ships. In fact, American merchants are shut out from the West Indies, which had been their principal trading partner. They're also shut out from the Mediterranean, as the British instigate Algiers to begin attacking American ships. So the two most likely places for American merchants to go, the Mediterranean and the Caribbean, are now closed to them. Some Boston traders, Boston merchants, get together with merchants in New York in the mid-1780s and finance a voyage of two ships, the Lady Washington and the Columbia, to go around Cape Horn and go to the Pacific Northwest. There they trade for otter pelts. They take these otter pelts across the Pacific to Canton, China, or Guangzhou, China, and they trade the otter pelts for tea and for silk and for silver and bring this back to Boston. So in 1787, the Columbia returns to Boston with tea. This is about 14 years after Bostonians had dumped tea into Boston Harbor. Now they're bringing tea directly from China. This is an expensive undertaking, a risky undertaking, but it turns out to be an extraordinarily lucrative undertaking for the Bostonians who had gotten into this China trade. It brings wealth in tea, silk, and silver to Boston. It also opens up trade in the Pacific Northwest, and we can see in the Pacific Northwest places like the Columbia River, named for the ship Columbia, towns like Salem and Portland that carry names of New England towns. And here in Massachusetts, we see an influx of wealth and also a changing of names. The town of Ponkapog, south of Boston, an Indian praying town from the 1600s, becomes the town of Canton in the 1790s in recognition of the trade with China. So we have this connection opening up between Boston and the rest of the world. Also, Bostonians trading across the Pacific will open up the Pacific to American whaling. So we see a real venture here out into the Pacific by merchants from Boston in the wake of the American Revolution. And we have some notable achievements by New Englanders. Thomas Handseed Perkins is one of the merchant families that invest in the China trade. Nathaniel Bowditch from Salem devises a new guide to navigation. Bowditch's Navigator is still one of the resources used in international trade. The British manuals had a lot of inaccuracies, which I believe the British kept there intentionally so that other ships would run aground, but Bowditch corrects the navigational guide and leaves a mark on navigation for years to come. So we see phenomenal advances of capital in Boston, and all of this is brought to a grinding halt in 1808 when the Jefferson administration imposes an embargo. This is because Britain and France were at war. Both were attacking American ships, and so the Jefferson administration thought if we simply withhold all of our trade, A, they cannot attack it, and B, they depend on American trade, and this will bring Britain and France to their knees, which doesn't really happen. Instead, it does interrupt New England trade, devastates the New England economy. Then in 1812, a 3-year war begins with England, which further interrupts and devastates New England commerce. And what the merchants of New England do, those who had profited from the China trade, is they invest in other things, in textile manufacturing and in industrialization. The China trade resumes after the war, and in Canton into the late 19th century, Americans were traditionally dubbed Boston men by the Chinese, as they believed Boston was its own country. The vessels they would see coming into Canton all had Boston on their quarter. And so Boston becomes synonymous in China with America, and Bostonians benefit from opening the trade with China, the trade with Asia, that is going to change the American economy.